Ma'am, this area is for authorized medical staff only. The voice cut through the ICU like a blade. Security Officer Grant Keller, chest puffed, badge glinting under harsh fluorescent light, planted himself in front of the sliding doors. His tone carried the authority of someone who'd never been questioned, and the smugness of someone who'd never been corrected. The woman he blocked, Dr. Nia Brooks, dark-skinned, early 40s, surgical mask tucked below her chin, froze mid-stride, latex gloves still on. The monitor behind her wailed a flat line. A patient was dying. "I am the medical staff," she said, calm but clipped. "Step aside." Grant tilted his head, eyes narrowing. "Ma'am, you people are not authorized past this point. Step back before I have to call it in." The nurses around the bed looked from one face to the other. No one spoke. Cam 2, ICU North feed, 1843-12 caught everything. The red code alarm, the trembling intern, the guard's smirk. "Charge to 200, Nia ordered. "No one moved. Did you not hear me?" she snapped, eyes flashing from the guard to her frozen team. "Charge to 200! But Grant had already grabbed her arm. "Ma'am," I said, "step away from the patient. Let go of me." Her tone didn't rise. That was the first mistake he made. Confusing calm for weakness. The defibrillator paddle slipped from her gloved hand and clattered against the metal tray. The patient's monitor screamed louder. The hallway camera, Cam 4, South Corridor, 1843-27, showed the struggle spilling out through the ICU doors. Her shoe caught on the threshold. A clipboard fell. Nurses gasped. "Officer Keller, that's Dr. Brooks," a young nurse shouted, but his radio was already at his lips. "Dispatch, got an uncooperative—" He didn't finish. A deep voice boomed from down the hall. "What the hell is going on in my hospital?" Heads turned. Richard Alcott, the hospital's CEO, stormed into frame. Tailored suit. ID badge visible even in the blurry footage. Grant released his grip automatically. "Sir, she—" "That's my chief surgeon," Alcott said, his voice like thunder cracking across the sterile hallway. For the first time, the guard's face drained of color. Inside the ICU, alarms still blared. The patient's vitals were seconds from irreversible. Dr. Brooks yanked her arm free, adjusted her gloves, and without another word, ran back in. The team moved instantly this time. "Charge! Clear!" The jolt snapped through the patient's chest. A beat, then another. The rhythm returned. The room fell silent except for the hiss of oxygen and the soft, steady pulse of life. Security footage shows Dr. Brooks lowering the paddles, chest rising and falling with controlled breath. Her eyes didn't leave the monitor. She didn't look at the guard, didn't look at the CEO, just at the line that now danced steady across the screen. When she finally spoke, it was quiet enough to cut through every whisper. "Next time you see a black woman in scrubs, do not assume she's lost. Time, stamp, 1844-05 audio, source, ICU hallway, camera 4. Have you ever watched someone mistake authority for superiority? It's a rare moment, when arrogance meets reality in a sterile hallway, and silence weighs more than apology. For years, St. Augustine Medical Center had prided itself on diversity in care. On paper, that meant equal opportunity. In practice, it meant photo ops in annual reports and whispers in break rooms about who looked the part. That night's footage would force every department to reevaluate what that slogan actually meant. But for now, all anyone saw was a security guard pale with disbelief, a CEO staring in shame, and a surgeon quietly saving the life he had interrupted. Incident report. Filed Officer Grant Keller, Security Division, St. Augustine Medical Center. At approximately 1843 hours, an unidentified female in unauthorized surgical attire attempted to enter a restricted ICU zone during a code-red event. Subject became non-compliant when questioned and resisted lawful direction. For staff safety, physical restraint was required. He typed those words with steady fingers and a racing heart. Every lie came easily, because in his world, the uniform made truth optional. He left out the part where the unidentified female was the hospital's chief of cardiothoracic surgery, the same woman who had saved more lives in that ICU than he'd ever met in his lifetime. He also didn't mention that she'd been called in mid-shift because the attending on duty froze during a pediatric arrest, or that she'd been paged by name. The system didn't care for those details, just the tone of authority in the report and the tidy conclusion that justified his actions. Inside the staff lounge, Nurse Elena Suarez scrolled through her phone, replaying the footage a third time. Someone from night shift had already leaked the hallway clip to a private nurses group. The comments flooded in. They dragged her? No way. That's Dr. Brooks. HR is gonna bury this. Elena glanced toward the ICU doors. Through the glass, Dr. Brooks stood alone beside the recovered patient's bed, still and composed. Her hands rested gently on the rail, eyes steady, lips moving as if in silent prayer or calculation. Maybe both. The rumor mill churned faster than any official memo. By sunrise, the story had shape. Black nurse attacks hospital security during code. The headline might as well have written itself. Local blogs loved scandal more than truth. They called her an emotional nurse, an unverified medical worker, possibly trespassing. None of them knew she'd been the one leading the hospital's heart valve transplant program, the one whose name hung on a plaque outside the surgical theater. When the CEO, Richard Alcott, summoned security to his office, Keller tried to rehearse his defense. "Protocol, sir." She refused orders. But Alcott wasn't listening to excuses. Not yet. He'd already seen the playback from Cam 4. He'd watched, frame by frame, the moment Keller's hand gripped Naya's forearm, the panic on the interns' faces, the drop in the patient's vitals. Alcott's voice was controlled, but each word landed like a gavel. "Officer Keller, you didn't ask her name, you didn't check her ID, you didn't even look at her badge." Keller shifted, throat dry. "She looked out of place, Alcott repeated slowly. "In the department she built?" The silence stretched long enough for the wall clock to click 3 times. "Leave your badge with HR," the CEO said finally. "Effective immediately." But even as Keller's career unraveled, the hospital's PR machine began its quiet repair. Emails circulated about ongoing review and conflicting accounts. The internal communications team drafted phrases that sounded neutral but bled with intent. "We take all incidents seriously. At this time, no evidence suggests misconduct. The hospital remains committed to fairness and safety." Behind those lines, Naya Brooks sat in her small office, lights dim, blinds drawn. Her phone buzzed with messages of outrage from colleagues and one text from her mentor. "Stay calm. The truth moves slower than gossip, but it moves." She exhaled, eyes on the framed photo of her first surgical team. She'd been here before. Not this exact fight, but versions of it. In lecture halls where she'd been mistaken for an assistant. In conferences where men talked over her. In elevators where patients assumed she was cleaning staff. But this time was different. This time there was video. Have you ever noticed how quickly a lie travels when it protects power? Hospitals speak the language of precision, vitals, dosage, timing. Yet when it comes to accountability, they forget how to measure truth. For 43 minutes, the internal system logged Dr. Naya Brooks as subject female unknown. No correction, no apology, just silence. That was about to change. Cam 7, East Corridor feed. The frame flickers, a second of static, then darkness. The footage resumes at 18:44:09, missing 57 crucial seconds. Those 57 seconds would become the center of everything that followed. IT office. 02:12 a.m., Miles Trent. Hospital tech supervisor leaned toward the monitor, squinting at the pixelated timeline. He'd been told to sanitize the footage before HR reviewed it, a polite word that meant edit. But as a father of 2 black daughters, he couldn't bring himself to press delete. "Someone pulled the feed," he whispered. The junior analyst beside him frowned. "Sir?" "Cam 7 doesn't glitch. It's fiber-linked to the main archive." "So, what do we do?" Miles leaned back in his chair. "We keep copies. 2 of them." He slipped a flash drive into his pocket and another into his boot. That was the moment the cover-up began to crumble. HR conference room. Next morning, fluorescent lights. "Cold coffee." The words internal review meeting glowed on the projector screen. Karen Willis, head of HR, straightened her blazer. "Let's remember," she began, "our goal is institutional stability. We're not here to assign blame." Across the table, Dr. Brooks sat silent. "No lawyer, no notes, just composure." "Dr. Brooks," Willis continued, "security's report indicates you failed to identify yourself during an emergency response. Is that accurate?" Nia met her eyes. "He didn't ask." Willis shifted. "Be that as it may, hospital safety protocols don't include assault," Nia interrupted, her voice steady but edged. A murmur rippled through the room. Next to her, Chief Nurse Elena Suarez clenched her fists. Willis cleared her throat. "We've reviewed the footage." "No," Miles said from the back of the room. "You've reviewed the edited footage." Heads turned. The IT supervisor stepped forward, holding a small drive between his fingers like evidence in court. "This is the uncut version," he said. "You should see what was removed. Cam 7, recovered footage, 1843. 24, the image plays in silence. Dr. Brooks steps toward the patient's bed. The monitor beeps frantically. The guard grabs her arm. She jerks free, shouting, "Patient coding, move!" He shoves her. The nurses gasp. She stumbles. Her elbow hits the crash cart. End of clip. Silence in the room. Willis swallowed. This wasn't included in the file we received." "No kidding," Miles muttered. "Have you ever watched truth resurface, like a heartbeat returning after flatline? It's never loud. It starts small. But once it pulses, there's no stopping it." That missing footage became oxygen for a fire that had been smoldering in the hospital for years. By noon, the footage had leaked. First, a 30-second clip posted anonymously to a nurses' forum. Then, reshared on Twitter with the caption, "They called her unauthorized." She was saving a life. Within 3 hours, Dr. Brooks trended citywide. Hospital PR scrambled. They issued a statement calling the video misleading, insisting on context. But the internet doesn't wait for context. It hunts for truth. At 4:17 p.m., Channel 9 News aired the full story. Anchor's voice steady, dramatic. New footage obtained from inside St. Augustine Medical Center shows a black female doctor being restrained by hospital security while attempting to assist a patient in cardiac arrest. By evening, reporters filled the lobby. Camera flashes turned the sterile white halls into a press room. Richard Alcott, the CEO, faced them under harsh light. "We are conducting a full independent investigation," he said. "Dr. Brooks is a valued member of our team." But the reporters weren't buying it. "Why was your chief surgeon labeled unidentified?" one asked. "Was this racially motivated?" asked another. The CEO hesitated, just long enough for everyone to see the answer written on his silence. That night, in her apartment overlooking the city, Nia watched the replay alone. Her phone vibrated with messages, some kind, others venomous. She muted them all. In the reflection of her TV screen, she saw two versions of herself, the composed surgeon who saved a patient's life, and the unidentified woman they had tried to erase. She whispered under her breath, "Not this time. Every institution has a heartbeat. Some skip when challenged, some flatline under pressure. But the healthiest ones, they learn to listen." And St. Augustine was about to hear itself for the first time. Boardroom, St. Augustine Medical Center, 9 a.m. The mahogany table gleamed under recessed lighting. Polished nameplates reflected the faces of the hospital's power brokers. Board chair Leonard Fisk, CEO Richard Alcott, and a half-dozen department heads who had built careers on managing crises before they became headlines. But this wasn't a crisis they could manage. Not anymore. The leaked video had hit 6 million views overnight. Morning news shows were calling it the ICU incident. Civil rights groups were already planning a rally outside the hospital. Alcott's voice cracked the silence. "We need to issue a formal apology and reinstate Dr. Brooks with public acknowledgement." "Richard," Leonard Fisk interrupted, tapping his pen sharply against the table. "You don't pour gasoline on a fire." "This isn't gasoline," Alcott shot back. "It's accountability." Fisk leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing. You really think the board will sacrifice our brand image to make a statement about race? The room went still. Everyone knew what he meant. They just didn't expect him to say it out loud. Alcott inhaled deeply. I think we already have. He pressed a button on the remote. The wall screen flickered to life. Cam 7 footage. The moment that had gone viral replayed in silence. The shove, the stumble, the defibrillator clatter. Even without sound, it screamed everything. When the clip ended, Alcott faced the board. You've all seen it. You can spin data, rewrite statements, control the media. But you can't rewrite what the world saw. Dr. Marcia Ellison, director of pediatrics, spoke softly. She saved that patient's life. The least we can do is save her dignity. Fisk turned. And if we lose funding from the donors who are tired of racial politics, then what, Marcia? Ellison met his stare. Then we build a hospital that deserves its name. For the first time in years, the boardroom walls felt too small to contain the truth pressing against them. Hospital lobby. 10:18 a.m. Camera crews lined the entrance. Nurses gathered in clusters, whispering. A group of young interns huddled near the elevator, their faces tense. Among them stood Tariq Miller, a 23-year-old medical intern, the one who'd been holding the crash cart during the code blue. He hadn't spoken since the night of the incident. But he'd seen everything, and he'd recorded it. Not on purpose, just a nervous habit. He'd been documenting his residency experience, taking short clips for a private vlog. He never imagined one of those clips would become evidence. Now, as the boardroom debated upstairs, Tariq stood at the base of the grand staircase clutching his phone. His conscience was a storm. Part of him wanted to stay silent, let it pass, finish his training, get his degree, survive. The other part of him heard Dr. Brooks's voice echo in his memory. If you're afraid to stand for truth in a hospital, where do you expect to find courage? He opened his laptop and uploaded the full, uncut version of his recording. Camera 3, personal footage, vertical, 1080p. His video captured the panic, the sound, the voices the security cameras had missed. Grant Keller shouting, "Step away from the equipment!" Dr. Brooks yelling back, "She's in VFib, clear the line!" The patient's heart monitor screaming. And then, the moment of impact. The upload bar hit 100%. He closed his eyes. There was no going back. PR War Room, 11:02 a.m. Within an hour, the hospital's internal communications team was in chaos. Screens filled with tweets, clips, captions, hashtags. ICU incident had evolved into da leather heel, a movement, not a moment. Tariq's video hit national news. Now the audio told what the silent footage couldn't. The sound of a woman saving a life while being restrained by force. This changes everything, Alcott murmured, staring at the news feed. Fisk's voice came through the speakerphone, sharp and cold. You'd better handle this, Richard. Don't let that doctor speak to the press, but she already had. Press conference, 2 p.m. The hospital's marble lobby had never seen so many cameras. The podium bore the gold St. Augustine seal, now a symbol of irony. Dr. Brooks stepped up to the microphone, wearing her white coat. No legal team, no written statement, just truth. I came to this hospital 15 years ago, she began, her voice steady but layered with fatigue. I've worked double shifts, trained dozens of young doctors, and held the hands of patients who didn't make it through the night. She paused. But last week, when I walked into that same ICU, the place I've saved lives, someone saw me not as a surgeon, not as a doctor, not even as a person. They saw me as a threat, the crowd murmured. Flashbulbs popped. I was called unauthorized medical staff. That's what the report said. Unauthorized. She looked directly into the nearest camera lens. Imagine spending your life earning a name, only for someone to erase it with one word. Her voice tightened, not from anger, but conviction. I didn't speak out because I wanted revenge. I spoke because next time it might not be me. It might be a young nurse, an EMT, a med student who doesn't have the title to protect them. Behind her, the CEO stood silently, not as her boss, but as a witness, and the city listened. Have you ever seen truth break containment? Like a pulse surging through clogged arteries, unstoppable once it finds rhythm. That's what happened at St. Augustine. The press conference aired across every major network. By midnight, healthcare boards, civil rights groups, and even the governor's office demanded review. The hospital's donor line froze. Their public inbox flooded with letters, not of outrage, but of reckoning. One read simply, "We trusted your care. Now earn it back." Hospital basement, security office, 3:41 a.m. Grant Keller sat alone, watching the replay of his own downfall. Every frame, every second, he mouthed the words he'd said, the ones that ruined him. "Ma'am, this area's for authorized medical staff only." He hit pause. In that frozen frame, his hand gripped her wrist. Her eyes burned calm fire back at him. For the first time, he saw what the world saw, not defiance, but dignity. And for the first time, guilt hurt more than fear. There's a moment when every story turns, when villains realize they aren't the heroes, and bystanders realize silence is participation. That's the breaking point. For St. Augustine, it wasn't the scandal. It was the reflection. Every doctor, every nurse, every janitor in that building had to face the question. When you saw it happening, what did you do? By sunrise, the board called an emergency vote. The decision was unanimous. Grant Keller terminated. Karen Willis placed on leave. St. Augustine placed under external review. And Dr. Nia Brooks appointed interim chief of surgery. As she walked back through the same ICU hallway where it all began, the staff stood silently. Not because of fear, but respect. Elena stepped forward, tears in her eyes. "Welcome home, Chief." Nia nodded once. "Let's get back to work." Sometimes justice doesn't start in a courtroom. It starts in a hallway, under flickering lights between fear and courage. And sometimes the only difference between disgrace and reform is one woman who refuses to walk away. The next morning, St. Augustine Legal Department, 8:02 a.m., piles of folders crowded the mahogany conference table. Documents stamped confidential sat beside cold coffee and the hum of whispered panic. At the head of the table, Attorney Marcus Vale, head of compliance, looked like a man trapped between duty and survival. He had been with the hospital for 15 years, long enough to know how to bury scandals before they reached daylight. But this wasn't a scandal anymore. It was a movement. The headline on the morning paper screamed from every newsstand in the city, "Black surgeon dragged out of ICU, truth leaked by hospital insider." Marcus rubbed his temples. "We can't contain this. The footage has been mirrored 100 times over. We pull it down, it pops up somewhere else." Across from him, the PR manager whispered, "What do we tell the board?" "The truth," said a voice from the doorway. Every head turned. It was CEO Richard Alcott, holding a folder under his arm and the weight of the entire hospital on his face. He stepped into the room. "We tell them exactly what happened. And we tell them who's responsible. Not just Keller." The silence that followed was suffocating. Everyone in that room knew what he meant. This wasn't one man's mistake. It was an entire culture's fault. Hospital archive room, 9:14 a.m. Downstairs, the hum of old servers filled the air. Miles Trent, the IT supervisor who'd leaked the uncut footage, stood before the racks, staring at a screen blinking "access denied." Someone had tried to wipe the security archives clean. All camera backups. Months of internal data. He cursed softly. "They're scrubbing everything." Then another voice came from the shadows. "You didn't hear this from me." It was Nurse Elena Suarez, eyes tired but determined. She slid a USB drive across the counter. "These are copies of the backup reports. Every complaint Dr. Brooks filed about racial profiling, all marked inconclusive." Miles took the drive carefully. "This is enough to bring them down." Elena nodded. "Then do it. For all of us." Legal deposition, 2 p.m. Dr. Brooks sat across from a semicircle of attorneys. The hospital's counsel asked her to recount the events objectively. Her voice never wavered. "I received a code red alert for a patient in cardiac arrest. I entered ICU to assist. Officer Keller restrained me physically. A nurse called for help. The patient survived." One of the lawyers, A young woman with polished diction asked softly, "Dr. Brooks, why didn't you identify yourself immediately?" Naya looked up from her folded hands. "I did. He didn't hear me. Or maybe he did, and decided I wasn't worth believing." The words hung in the air. The room went still. Behind the glass partition, Alcott watched in silence, knowing every sentence was another nail in the coffin of the institution he'd sworn to protect. Have you ever seen a lie stretch itself thin? At first it looked strong, papered over with words like procedure, policy, and miscommunication. But truth has weight, and when it presses down, those lies crack, clean, loud, and final. Hospital cafeteria, 4:30 p.m. Whispers turned into conversations. Conversations turned into defiance. The staff was split, half defending Keller, claiming he was just following orders, and the other half standing firmly behind Dr. Brooks. Nurses wore black ribbons on their sleeves in solidarity. Interns refused to clock in until an official apology was issued. And for the first time in the hospital's century-long history, the night shift walked out. News vans lined the street outside. The story had become more than a headline. It was a statement. Channel 9 News, 6 p.m., broadcast. New evidence obtained by our investigation shows that multiple complaints about racial discrimination at St. Augustine Medical Center were internally dismissed over a 5-year span. Records suggest deliberate manipulation of case outcomes to protect the hospital's public image. The anchor's voice carried calm authority, but every word struck like thunder. Photos of Dr. Brooks flashed across the screen. Her smiling in scrubs, her standing at charity galas, her mid-surgery with a focused gaze. Then came the contrast. Screenshots of redacted complaint reports, names blurred but stories painfully clear, one by one. The illusion of integrity shattered. The CEO's office, 8:15 p.m. Richard Alcott stood by the window, city lights flickering like a heartbeat below. He'd spent 20 years building this hospital's reputation. Now it was burning in real time. A voice broke his thoughts. "You could still save yourself," he turned. Leonard Fisk stood in the doorway, calm and smug. "Blame Keller. Call it an isolated mistake. Issue your apology, then quietly retire. I can get you out clean." Alcott stared at him for a long moment. Then slowly he smiled, not with humor but resolve. "No, Leonard," he said. "You're the reason this happened." He stepped closer. "You built a culture that punished truth and rewarded obedience, and I let it happen. That ends tonight." Fisk laughed coldly. "You'll destroy everything." "No," Alcott said, turning to his desk. "I'll rebuild it." He picked up the phone. "Get the press back here tomorrow morning. Every institution that buries truth eventually finds itself standing at a grave. Its own. But some choose resurrection, and that choice always starts with one decision. Tell the world." The next morning, 10 a.m., press conference. The hospital lobby was filled again, not with whispers this time, but with determination. Reporters, nurses, patients, interns, and community leaders gathered under the same roof where silence once ruled. CEO Richard Alcott stepped to the microphone. His voice was calm, deliberate. St. Augustine Medical Center has failed. The room froze. For years, we ignored complaints. We protected image over integrity. And last week, our system humiliated a woman who has saved more lives than any of us could count. He paused, glancing toward Dr. Brooks in the front row, effective immediately. The hospital will enter a full federal audit and implement external oversight of our policies. Every security officer will undergo anti-bias and medical identification training. And Dr. Brooks, he looked directly at her, will serve as co-chair of the Equity and Accountability Board. Applause erupted, hesitant at first, then thunderous. Outside the hospital, 11:45 a.m., reporters swarmed Dr. Brooks as she exited the building. "Dr. Brooks, how do you feel about the CEO's statement?" She smiled slightly. "It's a start. But justice isn't a press release. It's a promise you have to keep every day." The crowd quieted, letting her words linger. She turned toward the steps, the same ones where she'd once been dragged. And this time, she walked down them with her head high. Behind her, banners waved. Leather heel, accountability is medicine, the cover was gone. The hospital could no longer pretend its walls were clean. And in its place, not perfection, but possibility. Because sometimes justice doesn't come from courtrooms or lawyers. It comes from the people inside, and the ones who finally decide silence is no longer sterile. 2 weeks later, Federal Review headquarters, stacks of binders filled the long oak table, each stamped with the blue seal of the Department of Health and Human Services. The name on the first file, St. Augustine Medical Center, Internal Audit Report. Agent Laura Chen, lead investigator, adjusted her glasses and turned to her partner. 17 complaints, 14 dismissed internally, all marked with the same initials, LF. Her partner frowned. Leonard Fisk. Exactly. On the projection screen, the report scrolled line by line. It wasn't just Keller's incident anymore. It was a decade of buried bias. Hiring discrimination, suspensions without record, quiet resignations swept under policy violations. Laura exhaled slowly. This place wasn't just sick. It was in denial. Hospital parking garage, 7:45 p.m. Rain blurred the yellow glow of the streetlights. Leonard Fisk stepped out of his black sedan, tie loosened, umbrella tilted low. He wasn't coming in for work. He was coming in for control. In his briefcase sat a flash drive containing hospital donor contracts, his leverage. He planned to trade them for silence from the board. But when the elevator doors opened, Richard Alcott was waiting. "Evening, Leonard," he said. His tone wasn't angry. It was surgical, precise. Fisk hesitated. "You shouldn't be here after hours." Alcott stepped closer. "Neither should you." The two men stood face to face, years of tension coiled between them like wire. "I built this hospital," Fisk snapped. "Before you came in with your diversity pledges and PR theatrics, this place was respected." Alcott's eyes didn't flinch. Respected by whom? The ones who never got questioned? Or the ones who never got hired? Fisk's jaw tightened. "You're destroying us." "No," Alcott said quietly. "You did that when you decided some lives were worth more than others." He handed Fisk an envelope, official, sealed, final. "Federal subpoena," Alcott said. "They're coming for your files tomorrow morning." Fisk's hand trembled. For the first time in his career, power wasn't protection. It was evidence. There's a moment when accountability walks through the door and silence realizes it has nowhere left to hide. That's not revenge. That's justice, stretching its legs after a long sleep. Hospital break room. 8:10 a.m. Dr. Nia Brooks stood by the coffee machine, staring at her reflection in the chrome surface. The past 2 weeks had been a storm. Interviews, hearings, reporters. Everyone wanted her to be angry, to rage. But anger wasn't what she felt. It was purpose. Chief Nurse Elena walked in, holding a folder. "Results came in," she said softly. "Federal audit cleared you completely. They're recommending leadership training for all department heads. Real reform this time," Nya smiled faintly. "About time." Elena hesitated. "You're not thinking of leaving, are you?" "Leave?" Nia looked around the sterile white walls, the scent of antiseptic still clinging to the air. "This is my hospital, too. I'm not leaving it broken." Newsroom, Channel 9 headquarters. 10:30 a.m. Anchor. Malcolm Reed faced the camera. Breaking news. Federal investigators have confirmed systemic racial bias at St. Augustine Medical Center. Board Chair Leonard Fisk has resigned effective immediately. Former security officer Grant Keller faces civil charges for assault and obstruction. But in a rare show of unity, staff members are rallying behind Chief Surgeon Dr. Nia Brooks, whose leadership is being hailed as the hospital's turning point. Images filled the screen, nurses clapping, reporters flashing lights. A hospital finally breathing again. Federal Courthouse, 2 p.m. The courtroom buzzed with low murmurs. Keller sat at the defense table, eyes hollow, his once proud posture now deflated. His lawyer whispered, "You can take a plea deal. 2 years, probation." Keller shook his head. "She saved that patient," he said quietly. "And I stopped her." The judge entered. Silence fell. Dr. Brooks sat in the gallery watching. She hadn't come for revenge. She came for closure. The prosecutor rose. Your Honor, the state seeks to hold the defendant accountable for the unlawful restraint of a licensed physician during a critical medical emergency, resulting in harm and reputational damage. Keller stood. His voice cracked. I didn't know who she was. I thought she didn't belong. The judge leaned forward. And if she had been someone else? Someone without a title? Would you have treated her differently? Keller looked down. Yes. The admission landed like a thunderclap. Simple, brutal, true. It's never the confession that changes the world. It's what people do after they finally tell the truth. Outside the courthouse, 4 p.m., reporters swarmed as Keller exited in cuffs. Behind the flashing cameras, a quiet figure watched, Agent Laura Chen. Her phone buzzed. She answered, Yes? On the other end, her supervisor said, We're expanding the probe. Turns out this wasn't just St. Augustine. Other hospitals are showing similar complaint patterns. Laura nodded slowly. So it wasn't a story about one doctor? No, her boss replied. It's about an entire system that forgot who it was supposed to heal. Hospital rooftop, sunset doctor. Brooks leaned against the railing, looking over the skyline. The city glowed gold, glass buildings reflecting the evening light. For the first time in weeks, she felt still. Alcott joined her, holding 2 paper cups of coffee. You know, he said, handing her one, I read your first surgical paper last night, the one about post-operative resilience. She smiled. That was years ago. Before the politics, before the walls, he nodded. You wrote that healing isn't the end of pain, it's learning how to function through it. She looked out over the horizon. Still true. They stood in silence for a long time. The city buzzed below, alive with sound. Thank you, Alcott said finally, for reminding this place what integrity looks like. Naya chuckled softly. Thank me when it learns to keep it. Reform doesn't begin with policies. It begins with people, the ones who refuse to pretend the wound isn't there. And when they speak, healing isn't just personal. It's institutional. 1 month later, hospital auditorium. A banner hung above the stage. St. Augustine Equity Summit, Healing from Within Doctors. Nurses, students, and activists filled the seats. Dr. Brooks stood at the podium. Behind her, the screen displayed the hospital's new mission statement, Every Life Equal Dignity. Zero exceptions, she began, her voice calm, confident. When I was dragged from the ICU, I thought my career was over. But the truth is, that moment was surgery. Painful, necessary, and cleansing. It cut deep enough to expose what needed fixing. Applause built like a heartbeat, she continued. We can't undo what was done, but we can decide what happens next. Because medicine isn't just about treating illness, it's about treating injustice too. The room rose to its feet. The applause was thunderous, not for spectacle, but for survival. Have you ever witnessed a place remember its soul? It doesn't happen all at once. It happens in moments. Apologies whispered, policies rewritten, lives saved without prejudice. That's not just healing. That's transformation epilogue. 6 months later, the camera pans across the new hospital wing. A brass plaque glints under soft light. The Nia Brooks Center for Ethical Medicine, dedicated to those who fight for truth in silence and save lives in spite of it. In the background, nurses laugh, doctors rush by, and sunlight floods through tall windows. Justice isn't the end of the story. It's where compassion begins again. 6 months later, Washington, D.C. hearing room inside the U.S. Capitol buzzed with energy. Cameras, reporters, microphones, senators adjusting ties. At the center table sat Dr. Nia Brooks, composed as ever, her white coat replaced by a charcoal blazer. In front of her, a nameplate that read, Dr. Nia Brooks, Chief Surgeon, St. Augustine Medical Center. The hearing's title appeared on every monitor, Healthcare Accountability and Racial Equity Act, Public Testimony. The chairwoman, Senator Camille Ortiz, leaned into the microphone. Dr. Brooks, please begin your statement. Nia took a slow breath, her calm voice cutting through the noise. 6 months ago, I was mistaken for someone who didn't belong in the hospital where I've worked for 15 years. She paused. The cameras zoomed in. That mistake wasn't just about one man's bias. It was about a system that taught him to see threat before humanity. The room fell silent. I didn't come here to relive what happened. I came here because if a chief surgeon can be dragged out of an ICU, what's happening to the nurses, EMTs, and interns who don't have the titles to protect them? Behind her, a screen displayed the viral footage. The gasps from the public gallery were genuine, pain rediscovered in real time. Senator Ortiz leaned forward. Dr. Brooks, what changes do you believe could prevent incidents like yours from happening again? Nia met her gaze. Transparency, training, and consequences that don't vanish when the headlines do. A soft murmur rippled through the room, a mix of admiration and discomfort. The truth wasn't political. It was personal. Newsroom montage. Same day, Dr. Brooks' testimony strikes emotional chord in Congress. Proposed Brooks amendment gains bipartisan traction. Hospitals nationwide under review after viral ICU scandal. Across America, her name became shorthand for accountability. A real-world shift, not just a viral moment. At home, teachers showed clips of her speech in civics classes. Doctors quoted her words in seminars. And in a quiet living room on the south side of Atlanta, Grant Keller's wife watched the hearing alone. Tears streaked her face, not out of anger, but understanding. Her husband had lost everything, but maybe now, something better was being built from the wreckage. Change never happens in the headlines. It happens after, when the cameras turn off and people start rewriting the rules they once lived by. Hospital boardroom. St. Augustine, 9 a.m. Richard Alcott flipped through a new set of documents. The hospital's revised protocols. Mandatory bias and de-escalation training. Anonymous complaint channels for all staff. Quarterly community outreach programs. Every signature on the document represented a step toward the promise Nia had made. Across the table, she nodded. Now we have to live it. Alcott smiled faintly. You really don't stop, do you? Neither does the work, she replied. Meanwhile, local elementary school gym, 11:30 a.m. Rows of children sat cross-legged on the floor, their teacher playing a short clip on the projector, Dr. Brooks at the congressional hearing. After the clip, a small hand rose. Miss Sanders, is she a superhero? The teacher smiled. No, Eli, she's something even better. She's real. Montage. The Ripple. Expands a rural clinic in Alabama renames their training wing the Brooks Center for Equity. Nurses in Detroit wear badges reading 0 exceptions. In Los Angeles, a new foundation launches scholarships for minority medical students, the NIA Initiative. And on social media, the hashtag Black Leather Heal evolves into Not Just Let Us Heal, a national campaign advocating fairness in healthcare. Federal Health Review Committee, internal meeting agent, Laura. Chen stood before a digital board of statistics. Since the St. Augustine case, reports of discrimination have dropped by 43% nationwide. More hospitals are self-auditing before complaints even reach us. Her supervisor nodded. Looks like the ripple's turning into a tide, Laura smiled. Dr. Brooks didn't just fix a hospital. She reset the standard. Every movement begins as one story. But if the story is honest enough, and the wound deep enough, it stops belonging to one person. It becomes ours, evening, Nia's apartment, 7 p.m. For the first time in months, Nia was home early. The apartment was quiet. Warm lamplight, a half-read novel on the couch, the soft hum of the city outside. Her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. Dr. Brooks, I was one of your patients 5 years ago. You saved my life. I just wanted you to know. You saved it again when you stood up for us. She smiled softly, setting the phone down. The words were worth more than any award. A knock at the door. She opened it to find Tariq Miller, the young intern who had leaked the original footage. He stood nervously holding a folder. I wanted to give you this, he said, handing it over. Inside was a printed acceptance letter. Harvard Medical School, class of 2027. Nia's eyes widened. Tariq, This is incredible, he grinned shyly. Couldn't have done it without you. They asked me about integrity in my interview. I told them about that night. She laughed, tears pricking her eyes. And what did you say? I said courage doesn't start when it's easy. It starts when you're shaking. Nya smiled, proud and full of something deeper than pride, hope. The National Press Club. Award night, Doctor. Brooks stood on stage accepting the Humanitarian Leadership Award. Flashes lit the room as she began to speak. This award isn't for me. It's for every nurse who spoke up and got ignored. Every doctor who worked twice as hard to be seen as equal. And every patient who trusted a system that sometimes forgot how to see them. She paused, letting the silence breathe. Justice in healthcare isn't just about medicine. It's about memory. Remembering why we took an oath in the first place, to do no harm. The crowd rose to their feet. A standing ovation, not for fame, but for faith restored. In every era, there's a moment when the world stops looking away. Sometimes it starts with a protest, sometimes a verdict, and sometimes it starts with a woman who refuses to apologize for existing in the wrong hallway. Cut to hospital rooftop. Night, the same rooftop where Alcott once stood beside her. Now she stood alone, city lights glowing beneath her like a constellation. The voiceover deepens. They dragged her out thinking they were removing a problem. But what they did was awaken a reform. Montage, final ripples senator. Ortiz signs the Brooks Amendment into law. Grant Keller testifies in a rehabilitation program for former officers teaching about accountability. Leonard Fisk's name disappears from hospital boards. Nationwide, the Nya Brooks Foundation opens clinics in underserved neighborhoods, offering free checkups every Saturday. Final scene, ICU ward, St. Augustine Medical Center. The camera pans slowly through the new ICU. On the wall hangs a framed quote in black and gold. Authority without empathy is malpractice. Dr. Nya Brooks. The room hums with quiet activity. Doctors moving, machines beeping, lives being saved. A nurse whispers to a young intern. That's her quote. You know, the intern glances at the plaque, inspired. Yeah, guess that's the standard now. The world doesn't change when we demand perfection. It changes when ordinary people decide to act with extraordinary conscience. One hospital, one injustice. One woman who said, enough, and from that single moment of courage, the world remembered how to heal. 5 years later, St. Augustine Medical University, the auditorium was packed. Students in crisp white coats filled every seat, whispering excitedly as a tall woman in a tailored navy suit walked to the podium. Dr. Nya Brooks, now Dean of Ethical Medicine, placed her notes on the lectern and looked out over the sea of faces. Behind her, a massive screen displayed the words, Oath Day, the Next Generation. She smiled, not the cautious smile of a survivor, but the steady warmth of a teacher who had seen the world break and rebuild. 5 years ago, she began, this hospital made a mistake that nearly cost someone their dignity, and it cost all of us our trust. But the story did not end with an apology. The room was silent, hundreds of eyes fixed on her. It ended with transformation. It ended when people refused to pretend that comfort was the same as healing. Applause rippled softly through the hall. Nya continued, her voice both commanding and gentle. Medicine isn't just about fixing bodies. It's about protecting humanity, even when that humanity is inconvenient. Flashback sequence. Soft montage. The viral footage that once shocked the nation now plays quietly on a museum exhibit titled Turning Points in Medical Ethics. Visitors walk through, headphones on, listening to her congressional testimony. A plaque beside the exhibit reads, "The day they silenced her was the day she made the world listen." Back to present. The auditorium, Nya looked down at her notes, but didn't read them. There's a saying I've carried for years. Scars are proof that healing happened. This hospital carries its scars openly now, and because of that, it's stronger. She gestured toward the front row, a group of young medical interns wearing pins that read Brooks Scholars. Each of them represented something new. Diversity, Courage and a refusal to hide. Legacy isn't built in one act of courage. It's built in what happens after, when others learn to carry that courage forward. Scene, news clip. 5 years later. Special. A young reporter stands outside St. Augustine's new annex building. What was once a symbol of discrimination is now the nation's leading center for medical reform. Since Dr. Brooks's appointment as dean, over 3,000 healthcare professionals have been trained in empathy-based leadership. Reports of discrimination have dropped to record lows. The camera pans over the shining hospital facade, now engraved with words that define its rebirth. Every life, equal dignity. 0 exceptions. Scene. Visiting the past later that evening, Nia walked the quiet ICU corridor where it all began. The floor gleamed under soft light. Machines hummed rhythmically, life in motion. She paused at the corner. That corner. The one from the footage. For a moment she closed her eyes and exhaled. It no longer hurt, not like it used to. Now it felt like history. Necessary. A janitor walked by, pausing when he recognized her. "Evening, Dr. Brooks," she smiled. "Evening, Samuel. How's your daughter?" He grinned. "Got into nursing school, ma'am. Said she wants to work right here." Her heart swelled. "Tell her she's already welcome. The most powerful kind of justice isn't revenge. It's restoration. When the place that broke you becomes the place that heals others." Scene. Atlanta. Georgia Grant Keller, now dressed in plain clothes, stood in a community center gym speaking to a group of young security trainees. The banner behind him read, "Accountability and Ethics in Public Service." He spoke plainly, voice steady. "I made a mistake that cost me my career. I let prejudice make my choices for me. And I learned that a badge means nothing without empathy." A young recruit raised his hand. "Do you ever think people can really change?" Keller nodded slowly. "If I didn't believe that, I wouldn't be standing here. Dr. Brooks showed me that change isn't what you say. It's what you do after the world stops watching." The crowd applauded. Cut 2. News broadcast. Former security officer Grant Keller now leads a nonprofit for bias training across state hospitals. His program, The Second Oath, is funded by the Brooks Foundation. Scene, evening at home. Nya sat at her dining table surrounded by old photographs. Her parents in their Sunday best. Her residency graduation, the first hospital team she led. Her phone buzzed with a notification. New message, Senator Camille Ortiz. She opened it. The bill passed. Nia, Nationwide Hospital Accountability Now law. We called it the Brooks Standard. Tears welled quietly, but she smiled, not out of pride, but gratitude. The ripple had become a current. Next morning, sunrise, the city glowed under soft light. Nia walked out to the hospital courtyard where a statue stood, a bronze figure of a doctor kneeling beside a patient, hand extended. At the base, a small inscription read, "Dedicated to those who heal with courage." She touched the edge of the plaque gently, her reflection shimmering in the metal. A young intern approached nervously. "Dean Brooks, ma'am, I'm starting rounds today. Any advice?" Nia smiled. "Yes, never forget who you're treating or who you're becoming." The intern nodded, eyes wide with respect. When truth finally breathes, it doesn't just clear the air. It plants seeds. And if you water those seeds with courage, they grow into legacy. Scene. Classroom at the Brooks Institute of Medicine. A professor spoke to students. "Open your ethics manuals to Chapter 1, the St. Augustine case." One student whispered, "That's the story that changed everything, right?" The professor smiled. "No, not the story. The woman." The students opened their books, the camera panning across highlighted lines, ending on the phrase, "Integrity is the heartbeat of medicine." Dr. Nia Brooks montage, final legacy sequence. A group of new doctors take their oaths in unison. Voices echoing through a bright hall. A young black girl places flowers beneath Nia's plaque with a note. "Thank you for showing me what strength looks like." Senator Ortiz gives a press interview. The Brooks Standard will protect generations to come. Grant Keller shakes hands with trainees after a seminar. Ya stands on the hospital rooftop once again, the city alive below, her hair brushing in the wind. They say time heals all wounds, but time alone heals nothing. It's what people do with that time, how they choose to confront the pain, learn from it, and rebuild something better that writes the future. Dr. Nia Brooks didn't just survive injustice. She turned it into a curriculum. She turned humiliation into reform. And she turned silence into a symphony of change that still echoes today. The camera pulls back. The city skyline glowing under sunrise. The hospital shining like a symbol of resilience. Because healing, her voice whispers, isn't the absence of pain. It's the decision to keep helping anyway, based on true stories inspired by courage, dedicated to every voice that chose to speak.